Will Trump visit Iran to meet Mojtaba and Khamenei, or will he instead face trial there? A question that commentators now pose as Tehran's rhetoric oscillates between diplomatic openness and hardline retaliation, leaving observers to wonder whether the former U.S. president's fate will be political theater or legal reckoning. Speculation has grown that U.S. President Trump could be put on trial in Iranian courts, a rhetorical flourish voiced by some officials and pundits that, if pursued, would mark an extraordinary escalation in bilateral tensions and raise complex legal and diplomatic issues. A senior aide to Khamenei has publicly called for the extradition of the U.S. president, urging legal mechanisms and international pressure be used to bring him to Iran, comments that Tehran's critics say are intended more for domestic consumption and deterrence than as a realistic procedural step. Some hardliners in Iran are demanding that there be no direct talks with Trump and instead are calling for a new U.S. negotiating team, arguing that any engagement with a former president would be politically untenable and that fresh interlocutors are needed to secure credible commitments. Meanwhile, Iran appears to be moving ahead on security and operational matters without consulting the United States, a posture indicating Tehran's intent to assert autonomy in its strategic decisions even as diplomatic channels remain busy and contested. As talks between America and Iran continue, Tehran has issued a fresh threat aimed at President Trump, a development that commentators say injects a provocative element into fragile diplomacy and signals that hardline voices in Iran are vying to shape the negotiation agenda. A representative of Iran's supreme leader was reportedly behind the threat, according to Iran International, a detail that underscores how statements tied to the highest levels of Iran's political system can carry outsized weight in both domestic debates and international signaling. A senior Iranian hardline commentator demanded that the U.S. president be handed over to Iran for trial, an extraordinary call that, while likely rhetorical, reflects the intensity of anger among elements of Tehran's political establishment and their appetite for dramatic reprisals. Hossein Shariatmadari made the demand in an article published in the Kayhan newspaper, using the influential conservative outlet to broadcast a hardline position and to press negotiators to adopt a confrontational posture toward Washington. The hardline commentator said Trump should be handed over for trial in Iranian courts, repeating a partisan and legally fraught proposal that analysts say is intended more to rally domestic supporters than to outline a practicable legal course. Shariatmadari framed this demand as Iran's first negotiating condition, asserting it should be non-negotiable, a stance that highlights the role of maximalist rhetoric in shaping public expectations about what constitutes acceptable diplomatic outcomes. He also urged Iran's negotiators to refuse direct talks with Trump or his representatives, arguing that engaging with the former president would compromise Iran's position and legitimize an interlocutor he depicted as untrustworthy and politically tainted. Instead, Shariatmadari proposed negotiating with a delegation composed of members of the U.S. Congress, a suggestion meant to delegitimize the executive-to-executive channel and to force a different, more politically fractured form of engagement. An aide to Mojtaba went further, asserting that any avenging of the supreme leader must take place on American soil, a provocatively worded claim that appears designed to signal a willingness to pursue symbolic or retaliatory actions in response to perceived offenses. These comments reflect the views of a prominent hardline voice in Iran, capturing the intense domestic pressure on negotiators from factions that view concessions as unacceptable and that favor punitive measures against perceived adversaries. The article did not state that the proposal represented an official government position, and Tehran's negotiating team has continued to emphasize formal diplomatic channels, suggesting a gap between hardline commentary and the pragmatic choices of state actors. The remarks come amid continuing debate over the future of United States and Iran negotiations, highlighting how internal political contestation in Tehran could complicate efforts to secure a stable and enforceable agreement with Washington. Iran has called for a new Gulf security order that excludes the United States and all other outside military powers from the region. Iranian Foreign Minister said Tehran is ready to help establish a new regional security framework led by countries within the Gulf. Araghchi said recent wars had demonstrated it was time for Gulf nations to take responsibility for safeguarding their own security. Araghchi made the remarks after holding talks with Iraq's national security advisor, according to Iran International. The foreign minister said the proposed regional framework should also promote broader economic cooperation among neighboring countries. Araghchi argued that lasting regional stability could only be achieved through closer coordination and cooperation among Gulf states. He said military powers from outside the region should have no role in shaping the proposed future Gulf security architecture. Tehran presented the proposal as a lesson drawn from the region's recent security crises and repeated military confrontations. IRGC-affiliated FARS said a commentary discussing nuclear weapons did not represent the agency's official editorial position or policy. The agency said the article appeared in its user-generated content section and should not be interpreted as an official FARS position. The clarification came after the commentary claimed Iran had no alternative but to obtain a nuclear weapon for deterrence. The article argued nuclear deterrence was the only effective way to eliminate the military option against Iran. The commentary also claimed a nuclear weapon could help keep any future conflict with the US and Israel under control. The article surfaced as the United States and Iran continued exchanging military strikes amid tensions over the Strait of Hormuz. Subsequently, the Wall Street Journal reported US-Iran talks in Switzerland had stalled as hostilities between both sides intensified. However, Reuters reported the United States and Iran would continue negotiations as both sides sought to preserve the interim memorandum of understanding. A US official told Reuters the technical discussions would address every major provision contained in the interim memorandum of understanding. The official said commercial shipping would continue moving freely through the Strait of Hormuz while negotiations remained underway. Axios, citing US officials, also reported Washington and Tehran had agreed to halt hostilities while diplomatic efforts continued. The report said both sides were expected to meet in Doha later this week to address their dispute over the Strait of Hormuz. The diplomatic push came after an Iranian official said the planned June 28 talks had been abandoned following recent US strikes. Tehran said the conditions outlined in the interim memorandum of understanding had not been fully implemented before any fresh negotiations.
Well, the president's patience isn't going to last forever. Discussions are ongoing, particularly at a technical level of how to get inspectors in, the down blending and the other pieces that are focused on ensuring Iran never has a nuclear weapon. But they need to understand their leverage is diminishing by the day. The Gulf Arabs are creating all kinds of alternatives to the Straits of Hormuz. The UAE is moving oil through its pipeline that it's expanding. The Saudi Arabia is moving oil through its pipeline that it's expanding. We will create alternatives to our basing posture there. We will harden some may go underground, others will move. So this leverage that Iran thinks it has now is diminishing faster and faster, literally every week as we speak. And meanwhile, that this is in violation of international law. Even the Chinese government has said you cannot be taking tolls or fees. Iran was apparently relying on Oman across the waterway to help it set up this new infrastructure. And now Oman just yesterday has rejected the idea of tolls or fees. So they're completely isolated here. President Trump's not going to stand for it. And meanwhile, we continue to move ships out by the dozens every day. And world oil prices are not just stable, they're dropping. So Iran's attempt to hold the world hostage and their economies hostage are completely failing. So Iran, as Secretary Rubio just said, Iran has a choice to make. It's going to be a responsible nation, or it can continue down this path to absolute ruin. And don't think for a second that President Trump isn't going to leave every option on the table to achieve not just our aim, the entire world's aim, that Iran never has a nuke.